SBC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Latino America, bringing together the leadership teams and product specialists from retail and online operators in Latin American markets.
Discover the potential of Latin America's booming iGaming and sports betting markets at SBC Summit Latin America, the premier industry event in the region. Join SBC at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Miami from October 31st to November the 2nd. Register now at sbcevents.com.
Player protection, responsible gambling, safer gambling. Whatever terminology you wish to use, it remains the industry's biggest issue, influencing operational decisions and marketing strategies for operators, the policies of regulators and lawmakers, and the public perception of the sports betting and iGaming sectors. As part of our contribution to the wider debate and education around the issue, SBC is organising the Player Protection Day on November 8th. The digital conference features a lineup of safer gambling specialists from major operators and independent experts sharing ideas and best practice on topics such as how to communicate with at-risk players, the most effective RG tools, and the KPIs of problem gambling. Ahead of the conference next week, iGaming Daily is taking a whistle-stop tour of the gambling world to assess current thinking in international markets in the company of Jessica Welman, editor of SBC Americas and Canadian Gaming Business, Lucía Mouriño, head of B2B Media LatAm, and Ted Orme-Claye, a senior journalist working on SBC News. Hi, Jessica. How are you today?
Doing all right. Happy Monday to us all.
Glad to hear it, and thank you very much for the good wishes. Hi, Lucía. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. And Ted, I would go through the routine of asking you how you are, but I've been sitting next to you for about 8 hours in the office. So I've got a fair idea already. So.
How is Ted's day going, Martyn?
Ted's day is going very well. He's very happy to be at work, as he always is.
Absolutely.
A cheerful soul around the office, as always. So anyway, Jessica, I'm going to start with you. Because we've seen an explosion in sort of online gambling, or at least regulated online gambling. You know, let's not kid ourselves, it wasn't happening before. And also in advertising in the US over the past 5 years. How has that development influenced attitudes around responsible gambling? You know, is the industry now finding itself under the same sort of pressures as it's experienced in those sort of longer established European markets?
I would say it's a mix of yes and no. Is there a general belief in society, there are conversations that there are too many commercials? That's absolutely happening. But I think the difference is the way you're seeing it kind of play out. Whereas most, European countries, their gaming is regulated at the national level. We regulate state by state. So you're really seeing certain states take action. There was one Representative Paul Tonko has introduced a federal bill to essentially turn sports betting into a category like tobacco, where you can't put it on the internet, you can't advertise it on TV, you can't advertise it on the radio. That's not going to go anywhere. We're really not going to see federal action at this level, but we are seeing lots of regulators stepping up and making changes and fine-tuning the regulations that they have. Massachusetts is a great example of perhaps a state that is overthinking some of this. Their latest one is if you have a logo of your sports book inside a sporting facility, that logo needs to have a 21 plus attached to it somewhere visually. Couldn't believe we were actually discussing this, but that's the way these MGC meetings go, that they were actually debating. There's a DraftKings Sportsbook fan zone at a Boston venue, and it's open to all ages, but they were actually saying, like, maybe we need to put a 21 plus on this. I don't really know how that's going to fix things from a player protection standpoint. And I think the conversation is less about that you're potentially preying upon problem gamblers, and the issue tends to be more concerned that we are exposing children to an overload of sports betting that they haven't been exposed to previously.
Okay, it's interesting. I know in the latest season of The Simpsons, there've been a couple of gags about the amount of sports betting advertising on television and radio and so on. So I think if you're coming through into popular culture there, then there's people are noticing this stuff.
Yeah, it's overkill. You know, some leagues, I think the NFL has standards in place that it's like one pregame ad, one first half ad, a halftime ad, and a second half, and so 5 total: pregame, postgame, first, second half, halftime. You're seeing some of those, but I mean, honestly, as someone living in Kentucky, which is the state most recently to launch sports betting, I get served a FanDuel ad every podcast I listen to, and I do not listen to sports podcasts. I'm listening to Real Housewives podcasts. I listen to 2 of the Dance Moms recap old episodes of Dance Moms, and I am being served FanDuel ads in between them. So they are really going all out, like canvassing groups that are maybe going to be more put off by this than others.
Oh, interesting. And I'm learning a lot about you from your taste in podcasts.
Yeah, I hate to admit to people that, yeah, I've watched Dance Moms, and I relive it in the podcast form.
So just looking sort of ahead to this conference next week, I've spent a significant proportion of my working life over the past 6 weeks trying to put this together and speaking to some of the major operators here in Europe, and I've been pleasantly surprised, but also very surprised by the amount of resources they are putting into their player protection programs now. Just to give you one example, it's Entain's second biggest spend after the rollout of BetMGM around the world. So they're taking this stuff very seriously. So I'm just wondering what you're seeing in the US. So the market leaders there also investing heavily in sort of player protection measures?
I do think they are. You know, the candid conversations I have are operators are like, listen, a problem gambler is not a good customer for us. You know, that's not somebody that we want from a financial perspective. So there's motivations there. But there are also just, as I mentioned, regulators taking steps and operators stepping up to the plate and upping what they're doing. I think a lot of them are actually going kind of above and beyond what the regulations are even asking. FanDuel does a lot of work with like Rob Gronkowski and some of the endorsers that they have to do responsible gambling messages on top of their standard advertising and try to make it feel a little more presentable. I do think it tends to be a little cookie cutter across each of the operators. I don't know how much of them are necessarily innovating, but they are dedicating funds to it. The leagues are dedicating a lot of funds to it. The NFL, for example, funds these agility grants for the National Council of Problem Gambling that allow them to invest in research. Looking at the grants, you can go on SBC Americas. This was up last week. A lot of these were focused on getting in at the student level. And it's not, you know, you don't want BetMGM coming into your middle school and teaching you about responsible gambling. But taking these groups in just the same way you would take kids and have a conversation about drugs or sex or alcohol, just talking about, hey, if you're going to gamble, these are some things that you should know. So that's tough when you're an operator. As I said, you don't want to be doing that yourself. So I think where most of the innovation we're seeing comes from is funds that are going to research from these operators.
Sure. I mean, education is such an important part of the piece here. It's not all about helping problem gamblers once they've developed that problem. It's much better to have that education at the start, I think.
Yeah, there's awareness around the tools. There's cool-off periods. There's limitations, self-exclusion lists. And I think there's plenty of assets out there. I think it's more just getting people to talk more openly about it. You know, I think there's also this misconception with player protection, right? Where I may have one night that I probably spend more than I intended to playing video poker. And it doesn't mean that I am a diagnosed problem gambler. It just means that we all have moments, and taking advantage of these tools can help us make sure those moments are few and far between.
Yeah, there's one major operator in Europe has introduced a tool which is nicknamed internally the Friday night tool, which you're allowed to exclude yourself for a certain period of time each week. which they suggest the best time is after the pubs close on a Friday night.
That's actually pretty genius.
Yeah, when people tend, their judgment is impaired, shall we say. So it's a nice idea. So thanks, Jessica. So if we could head a little bit south from where you are and find out a little bit about what's happening in Latin America. So Lucía, there's obviously, huge excitement in the international industry about the spread of regulation across the region and the opportunities that might bring. How much have fears about problem gambling influenced discussions about regulation and the thinking of lawmakers?
Well, I wouldn't say there's a spread of regulation. It's just around a small number of countries that are bringing attention to the rest of the markets. Like, obviously, Brazil has done that, but also Peru has passed regulation recently as well. And yeah, it's just a small number of countries, but they're huge countries. So I feel like Brazil has definitely started the conversation around advertising, especially around advertising regulations and how aggressive operators are being around players. And with no clear rules around anything at the moment, just what was passed, there's a lot of concern around player protection. Like, while the government has tried to install this topic into the agenda, it's still something that it's not easily understood within the very local industry or the players. So it's kind of a gray area where it's influencing the discussions, but it's also a point where everyone gets stuck for not having enough information. Like, compared to what just said, I wouldn't say LatAm is undeveloped, but the attention focus is obviously somewhere else, mainly because there's lack of information and education. And I don't know if it comes to people defending different interests, hopefully not. But it's in some point it's influencing the decisions, but at the same time it's not. It really is a gray area right now.
Okay, that's interesting. And obviously I don't speak to people working in Latin America as often as you do, but in my limited conversations with people there, I've heard one fear expressed multiple times, and that is that players used to bet in offshore sports books. Even the less reputable ones where they might get ripped off. The bigger international companies who want to become licensed are a little bit worried they won't be able to attract customers because they think players will find a proper KYC process, spending limits and so on far too intrusive when they've been used to just being able to register with an email address and a credit card or some form of payment method. Do you think there's anything in that fear?
Yeah, but it's not just that. Like, going back to Brazil, the proposed rules say that players' winnings will be subject to several taxes if they're higher than around $450, something like that, which is a very low number, all things considered. So, I wouldn't necessarily say that they won't switch to licensed operators because they would be too intrusive. I think it's more of what the unlicensed operators offer these players, because they're not subject to these rules, or let me correct myself, because they're not following the rules. They offer players crazy bonuses and promotions. So naturally, these players that lack information or education around gambling will ultimately feel more attracted to them.
Yeah, we've seen some of that here in Europe, I think, as well. Regulation is getting tighter and tighter, and research is showing that the black market in a number of countries is, as a result of that, or, well, who knows whether it's cause and effect or not, but the black market is certainly getting bigger in countries like Italy, Sweden, and we think in the UK as well. So it brings me nicely on to Ted. Now, I'm not sure quite where to start. For the purposes of this edition of iGaming Daily, you're a European expert, Ted. Now, there are so many things I could ask you at this point, so I'll leave you to choose, whether you want to talk Serie A footballers, the Spanish ad ban, the sort of constant stream of bad publicity in the UK related to problem gambling, imminent changes in Ireland, possibly Germany's regulatory regime. What would you say the general attitudes are and the biggest RG issues facing the industry here are at the minute?
Well, I mean, that was one hell of an intro. I feel like I should just chuck a dart at a map of Europe and talk about whichever one it lands on.
Please be Andorra.
So yeah, it's interesting. Just based off this conversation here, there's a few different sort of comparisons we can and similarities and differences we can find with the US and Latin America with this regard. Obviously, so one of the ways I guess we should start is player protection has really been at the forefront of a lot of discussions around gambling in Europe, across a lot of different countries in recent years. What I think is interesting, an interesting contrast of what Jess has noted with the US, is that over here it has come as a very sort of government imposed, top down enforcement in many ways, especially with regards to regulation. Although, again, like with the US, we've seen the operators in many cases being quite innovative and trying to bring in new methods and new ways of protecting their players, like with Entain's ARC and Kindred working towards having 0% of their revenue derived from gambling harm by I've forgotten what the date was now, but they keep they're issuing regular updates on that. If you just want to look across the various countries, as you said, Martyn, there's quite a few that are bringing in these sort of some tighter regulations. If you want to talk about the UK, I know we've spoke about the Gambling Act review hundreds of times on this podcast. It's not quite made it into a Simpsons reference yet, but we've spoken about it a fair bit. Player protection has been at the forefront of that. The UK Gambling Commission and the government department responsible for gambling, which is the DCMS, just concluded their first round of consultations on the white paper with sort of safe game design, player preferences on marketing, and affordability checks or finance risk checks, all sort of the main focus areas of that. The next area is now obviously going to be the research, education and treatment levy, about getting operators to pay to make mandatory payments into funding research into areas like player protection. Moving away from the UK, Ireland again, their regulatory debate is focused heavily on player protection. It's been at the forefront of that. Want some other big examples? The Netherlands, their market was obviously launched on 1st of October 2021. Since then, it's boomed. And there's been a lot of concerns there about player protection. Similarly, actually, to the US regarding the sudden upsurge of advertising that there was after this regulated market came into place, which is the concerns around that have now led to the Netherlands, as of July this year, bringing in quite a tight ban on advertising, and I believe sponsorship is due to be phased out in 2025. That's also been mirrored in neighbouring Belgium. So, yeah, the player protection is really at the forefront of the regulatory discussion across Europe. Although, as you noted, there's also been a big sort of counter-argument with regards to what impact has tightening regulations had on pushing customers towards a black market, which then, of course, has the least amount of player protection provisions available.
Can I ask, how common are affordability checks in Europe? Because as an American, I mean, there is no shot I would gamble at a sports betting app. Like, you don't really check an American's credit unless you're like buying a house or signing a lease. Like, that's just not information that people have. But I'm curious how prevalent it is in Europe.
It's really, I can only speak from the UK at the moment. The affordability measures, it's still kind of early on, really, for me to say how much they are being encountered. I know the white paper obviously set out some provisions and thresholds for when a check should be conducted. But from what we understand, from certain reports we were getting in certain sections of the media, particularly if you look at the Racing Post, which to our non-UK listeners is the sort of the biggest news for horse racing in the UK. Obviously, the sport is very deeply ingrained with gambling. Apparently, people are already being asked for to prove affordability at racetracks and things like that, and there's been complaints among customers about the impact this is having on their sort of race day experience and their general betting experience. So it does seem to be becoming more widely adopted in line with the regulations here. But I think the impact it's going to have had on sort of betting customers as a whole is yet to entirely be seen yet, I think, from what I understand.
Lou, I would imagine this is unheard of in LatAm too. I can't imagine affordability checks are common there.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And plus, in many LatAm countries, you don't have the equivalent of the credit score in the US. So, what would you check? Yeah, this is crazy.
Yeah, I interviewed the head of sort of player protection at Entain a couple of months ago, and he told me that as a general rule, interventions they make to point out to players they are exhibiting some sort of worrying behaviour were really well received, and players acted on those. However, when you spoke to them about affordability, players just got angry. People regard their finances as a personal matter, and you don't have to share it with the supermarket when you go and do your shopping. So people think, the public think they shouldn't have to share this information with bookmakers as well. Whether that will stop affordability checks coming in, I very much doubt, though, because it's an idea that within government has some backing behind it.
Yeah, it's really been, even from before this white paper was published, it was for many months, it was sort of touted as being one of the most concrete outcomes of the review, wasn't it? So yeah, the government had seemed dead set on bringing it in, regardless of what opinions we may have been getting about it in the months since.
Yeah. Okay. And on a similar note, Ted, I'm going to give you the largest possible geographical area to cover now, because you are also our Australia correspondent, because I know you write a lot about Australia on SBC News, and you've just written a feature for the new issue of SBC Leaders magazine on advertising restrictions in Australia as well. So what's going on in Australia that you can share with our listeners?
Again, so similarly, it's mirroring a lot of European developments in some ways. There's been a lot of government attention on gambling, its societal impact, the prevalence of it, and the impact that this then has on customer protection and protection of vulnerable people. So the Labour government have been onboarding the recommendations of a parliamentary inquiry into gambling and, as I said, its societal impact. One of these recommendations is a credit card ban. Sorry, I should elaborate more on that. A ban on using credit cards for gambling payments, just so we're clear on that, which would mirror what's happened in a lot of European countries. The UK did the same. I believe it was back in 2019, I want to say, that came in over here. Also, what is being touted and quite vocally supported by some Australian Labour MPs at the federal level is an advertising ban, similar to what we're seeing in the Netherlands. This seems to be getting some pushback from the industry, who have cited similar claims to, again, what's been put around a lot in Europe. Of one of the main benefits of advertising is, of course, that it promotes the regulated offer to customers. And the regulated offer is always one that has the most player protection measures involved, the most robust provisions, whilst unlicensed operators don't. But we're also seeing, similar to the US, action at a state level as well. New South Wales and Victoria, in particular, we're seeing a lot of developments going on there with the governments, which also under the Labour Party. Moving quite heavily in the direction of really tightening up player protection measures. I think Victoria is eyeing up some of the tightest measures in the country. From what I remember, they want the Crown Melbourne, which is one of the flagship casinos in the state, to be kind of a national leader in player protection. And then in New South Wales, there is a government panel that's been appointed to set up a roadmap, sort of more regulatory reform going into 2024. So developments there seem to be catching up quite quickly with what we're seeing in Europe. Really,
they're working to go completely cashless at the casinos, aren't they?
Yeah, there's some that's a good one actually, Jess. Thanks for reminding me of that. Yeah, there's some trials going on at casinos to go as you said, entirely cashless, which is quite a novel idea, really. We've not seen that anywhere else. Well, not in many other places. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what my own personal opinion on that is. I always thought that maybe if you go in with cash in your pocket, that's just what you're going to spend on the night. I would have thought that going in with just your debit card leaves you open to spending more money. But that's just me personally. I don't know what other people's views are on that.
Yeah, this is where I plug my SBC leaders op-ed from the most recent issue, basically asking, do you have a right to gamble anonymously? I gamble in a casino once a week, and I do it with cash, and I kind of enjoy that nobody necessarily knows what I bought in for and what I cashed out for.
Oh, well, there we go. We'll leave your gambling habits as anonymous as that then, Jessica.
My dance mom habits on the table. My gambling habits, that's where I'll get a little cagey.
Okay. I think I'd go the other way around if I was watching dance moms myself. But, there we go. Well, Ted, Jessica, Lucía, thank you very much for joining me today. There'll be a lot more on player protection next week on November the 8th on our Player Protection Day. We'll leave a link in the show notes for how you register for the conference. And of course, the iGaming Daily team will be back with more news and comment tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Latino America, being held at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Miami on the 31st of October to the 2nd of November. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network. Happy reading.